Good afternoon. It is Monday, October 6th, 2025. We're monitoring Invest 95L as it continues to move pretty quickly off to the west-northwest at 15 to 20 miles an hour. It is going to get to the northern Leeward Islands in roughly about 3 to 4 days. So make sure you have your hurricane plan in place just in case if you are told to evacuate by your local officials and your local authorities, just in case if you do get tropical storm force winds during that time frame as Invest 95L gets very, very close to the islands. Here's a closer zoomed in view on 95L for this evening right after the sun sets here. And as we can see before the sun does set, we do have organizing deep convection that is starting to show up in banding futures according to the convective type envelope that the system is thriving within. We have winds out of the westerly direction here, curving around here. So this is looking a lot more healthier, and one could even argue that it could already be a closed circulation somewhere underneath all of this deeper convection. And also another thing that we're not seeing with what we've been seeing in the past with these tropical systems is any arcing bands of outflow, which would otherwise indicate lots of drier air in the atmosphere surrounding this wave pocket, which indicates that the system is in a very favorable environment where it can actually sufficiently organize that deep convection in banding futures around the circulation. We could also see this when we zoom out here on the water vapor imagery on Invest 95L. Take note of all of the bright gray colors here, indicating that there's not a whole lot of dry air surrounding the wave envelope right now. And that's what we see here with more persistent deep convection now trying to organize in convective banding like futures. However, though, there is a little bit of a touch, just a touch of dry air here off to the west and the northwest of the circulation. And any vertical wind shear that comes out of the west here would probably be able to shove some of that drier air in, but it does not appear that is happening at the moment as this gray color here is moving out ahead of this wave pocket, which indicates that there is a lot of moisture that is able to remain caught up with our system here as it moves generally off towards the west-northwest at a pretty quick speed. And that's one of the only limiting factors that will prevent this from organizing in a hurry. But once it gets closer to the Leeward Islands, it does slow down considerably and we end up starting to see a bona fide system. Right now, experts at the National Hurricane Center on their 7-day graphical tropical weather outlook give this an 80% chance of tropical development over the next 7 days and a 70% chance. That is up from yesterday where it was only 60%. So we have a very high chance that this is actually going to develop into our next named storm, which would be Tropical Storm Jerry on our list of named storms and would be our 10th named storm of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. Not to mention, we also have another area of disturbed weather that the National Hurricane Center just recently tagged. This does not look to develop anything significant in the short term at the moment or even in the next 7 days, but you never know what could end up happening down here in the Bay of Campeche. Crazy things can happen. We saw a great example of that with Milton of last year, where the chances were not very high, and then all of a sudden the thing really blossomed and become one of the strongest hurricanes ever recorded in the southern portion of the Gulf. So yeah, we also got to watch that system while also keeping a main watch on 95L. So now, what is the steering forecast looking like ahead of Invest 95L as it continues to track towards the west-northwest at 15 to 20 miles an hour? Well, this is a pretty straightforward forecast over the next 3 days. The system is being guided in this general direction by a strong subtropical ridge to the north, not super duper strong to guide the system directly towards the west. There is some poleward gain here with our system, as there is a little bit of an erosion to the subtropical ridge here to the northwest of the system, just a little bit, enough to yank this a little bit towards the west-northwest, and that's what we're seeing today. All right, so pretty much that is a straightforward forecast here over the first 3 days. So we know pretty well that the system is going to be somewhere in this area by Thursday morning on the 9th day of October, while this western flank of the subtropical ridge begins to erode a little bit. While heights are a little bit above average here, it is not enough to prevent the system from turning out to sea. But when that turn occurs will be to be announced. We really don't know if it's going to happen sooner or if it's going to happen later. If it happens later, it's going to be over these islands. So that is something to consider here when looking at forecasts like this. There is still a demise of uncertainty in the modeling in today's update, with the GFS model being safely out to sea here, avoiding the islands now entirely, versus our other group of suite of models indicating that the system could clip or go on top of some of the Leeward Islands in about 3 to 4 days. So something to keep an eye on going forward. But we can see this in about 96 hours. By Friday morning, the system is safely to the northeast of the islands here, because again, our subtropical ridge here was able to get eroded, and it's not able to build back to the west fast enough and quick enough to yank the system further west. That's at least with what the GFS shows. Now, why is the system going to be turning out to sea and missing the United States mainland for the time being? Well, if we look upstream here from our system, of course, we talked about this ridge right here that's going to be in place. We have the shortwave trough that is going to be ushering towards the east here. But what's left here is really not much of a ridge out across the mid-Atlantic states of the eastern seaboard. And so there's going to be an upper level low that's actually going to develop here, because you got a little bit of a short wave here that is going to be racing to the southeast with a more longer wave trough to the northeast of it. So in relation to these features here with low there, and there, we're going to actually be able to lower our height lines more efficiently. So you'll see that here on the GFS, how that trough develops over the southeastern United States in about 5 days. And with this ridge that is in place here, that's going to allow the system to curve out to sea pretty sharply here, and actually sharp enough to where this could actually miss out on hitting Bermuda, which is good news to hear for anyone vacationing to Bermuda. You just got done getting hit with Imelda not too long ago. This would be a good scenario for Bermuda to not see a landfall and this turning out to sea. However, though, this pattern is quite complicated on exactly how strong this trough is going to be in relation to the background environment of steering flow patterns that exist here in the modeling. If we look at prior model runs, this trough is a little deeper, but the system is also moving a little faster, and that really makes a difference. If our system ends up being slower and further to the southwest with this trough and this ridge like this buckled up in the northeast, this trough could actually help yank the system further to the north before the turn happens out to the northeast. Or if this trough is stronger and this ridge is a little stronger, that could actually allow the system to actually bend and get yanked and slingshotted very close to the eastern seaboard. We have not had scenarios like that in recent model runs of the GFS, which is great news. So an out to sea track looks a little bit more likely than something that would get kind of flung towards the northeastern coast, which in this case is great news to hear. But just so you know, there is complications here with the forecast. Now, looking at the European model, the trough exists here, but also if we go forward out in time, this ridge is not as pronounced up here to the north. So again, the system will likely turn out. But the Euro also has a very weak system of a tropical depression, which is probably an outlier scenario, given the fact that we have our Canadian model that agrees on something quite similar to the GFS. Only though, that the Canadian model has us a little bit closer to Bermuda in a little over 5 days away. So this is going to be a fast mover because of the steering influences that are going to be involved. But some slowing of the system over the Leeward Islands is expected in the next 2 to 4 days. So now that we talked about the track forecast ahead of Invest 95L, let's talk about the environmental forecast that is getting involved for such a strong system that could develop across the northeastern portion of the Caribbean or the Leeward Islands in about 3 to 4 days. So looking at the upper level 200 millibar flow chart here on the GFS, we can see clearly where our jet stream is to the north here, with winds blowing out of the westerly direction. Here's some good outflow that the system exists within, but what you don't know about the system is there is some vertical wind shear out of the westerly direction, and one would argue with me that how, David, how is there westerly vertical wind shear over the system? But we got to understand that vertical wind shear is not just with upper level winds, but it is also wind change with height. And when you have a system that is moving this quick off to the west-northwesterly direction, up to even 20, at times 24 miles an hour. So again, this system is racing. There's what we call relative vertical wind shear, which is not really easily detected on global computer models. And what I mean by that is when you have flow out of the easterly direction, pushing against the system, helping it move faster, with upper level winds that are lighter out of the easterly direction, that owes to a slight westerly vertical wind shear. And I can show you clearly what I mean by that. If we take an average skew-T sounding here plot, let's kind of zoom out here, we can see that if we look at the southeasterly flow trying to guide the system again into that west-northwesterly direction, we have actually lighter easterly flow aloft here. So you can see how these barbs are generally out of the easterly direction. Okay, and then stronger flow. So actually, let me make this a little bit simpler. So the arrow being so small here indicates that vertical wind shear or upper level winds are lighter. Okay, so as we go down to the surface, the winds actually get stronger and stronger. And so what that owes to is if you have faster wind blowing in the same direction underneath lighter flow, that actually owes to a westerly vertical wind shear of about 15 to 20 knots. That's one of the reasons behind why 95L is struggling or taking its own sweet time to get better defined because of that vertical wind shear. So keep that in mind. Yes, we have easterly flow aloft against the system, but we also have stronger flow underneath the system, helping to guide the system quicker than the upper level winds can handle. And that's what we get. We get that vertical wind shear. And that's going to stay with us for a while. And that's why the GFS is not as enthused about this developing as quick as prior model runs, which had a much stronger system here. You can see what I mean by that. This vertical wind shear here is a little lesser, but still stronger in the lower levels of the atmosphere, lighter aloft here. And so there is a little bit of a touch here of westerly shear of about 10 to 15 knots. So vertical wind shear is not going to go away entirely, but there might be a period where the steering flow changes enough, where it weakens enough to where we get better outflow exhaust around the system, where we're able to get more sufficient bona fide deepening of our cyclone. And we can see that here in about 4 days. If we take one more average skew-T sounding here, if this one could actually load this time, we could actually end up seeing that our flow here is more aligned with our flow at the surface. So that equates to lesser vertical wind shear, generally under about 15 knots. So a slightly better improving upper level environment out ahead of 95L over the next 4 days seems more possible than not. Okay. That's what we're seeing there. Now, looking at the deep layer moisture plot, we can see a little bit of that vertical wind shear here in about a couple of days. So by Wednesday morning, you can see there is some asymmetry to our moisture plot here. See the green colors here? This indicates a lot of moisture in the deep layers of the atmosphere. So if we actually kind of pull up a sounding here in this green area, you can see there's a lot of moisture in our skew-T vertical profiles. So there's not a whole lot of dry air here. And the average deep layer moisture plot here is 93%. But if we go off to the west here where the brown colors are, we have relative humidity of 22%. And we can see a big, thick, dry layer here located at around 18 to 24,000 feet, which is pretty deep. And that's what we see here on the model. So why I say that is, again, even so we have easterly flow aloft on top of the system, that doesn't mean vertical wind shear is light. And we can see that here, how the system is actually overtaking the easterly flow a little bit, and we have asymmetry. So here we do have a little bit of vertical wind shear to work with, but you'll see here as we move forward in time that vertical wind shear falls apart a little bit here. You can see more asymmetrical to the moisture plot here, not weighted on one side. So that means the system is able to now develop a sufficient inner core structure for which it can actually strengthen. And we can continue to see that here on our forecast. So that's why the GFS now has a strengthening system, Not as strong as prior model runs, where if we go to yesterday's model runs, it was a lot stronger, more barricaded underneath that moisture pocket. In today's forecast, it's a little faster, a little to the north, and speed here would mean a big difference, because if it's moving faster, it's going to have a little bit more vertical wind shear to deal with and lesser in the way of strengthening. So now, what does this look like on the H-Wharf model? So, well, the H-Wharf model, or the GFS wasn't intense enough, the H-Wharf is pretty intense here, indicating that vertical wind shear won't be as big of a problem if we take an average Spegetti plot on this. So pretty much kind of look at the whole plot system here. We can see vertical wind shear overall on this forecast is generally right around 15 to 20 knots, actually a little bit significant. But at this time with the strengthening system, vertical wind shear of 15 knots doesn't mean a whole lot to the system, because again, we have that flow out of the southeast, and then we have lighter flow, but also out of the easterly direction. So if you connect these two dots, you can kind of get an idea. We're going to have a little bit of a northeasterly to northerly shear on the system, and not much in the way of westerly vertical wind shear. All right, so that's what that is. So going back to our wind forecast, you can see what ends up happening here. This approaches or does not hit the islands directly, but that doesn't mean that you won't see any significant impacts. Because if we look at our radar or simulated radar forecast, you could actually see there is some very intense banding-like features moving over Guadeloupe, Dominica. If you're in St. Lucia, keep that in mind. These outer bands could contain some tropical storm force wind gusts, so maybe some property damage, some coastal flooding, some landslides, that sort of thing with some of these banding-like features. But the inner core itself stays offshore. That's where you have winds that are Category 3, Category 4 intensity, and so that stays offshore. But yeah, you're not very far away from seeing tropical storm force winds on some of these other islands here, that is Saint. These are the no, not all my islands. Ugh. Oh my gosh, brain fart there. But either way, some of these other islands here, about 29 to 30 miles away. I've seen those tropical storm force winds on this plot. But if we look at prior model runs, you can see this is a little further offshore now, but also a little stronger, which means your tropical storm force winds don't go away entirely here. And so that's something to consider here, that this could be a very intense hurricane, but hopefully it stays far enough offshore to where your impacts are not that big. Now, we do have a unfortunate worst case scenario still coming from our halves model group here, showing us that the system does get very close to Guadeloupe. Again, the bow tie butterfly island, as you can see here, and this would arrive in about 4 days. So we're looking at about Friday early morning here with near hurricane force winds. Very tight inner core structure here. So this is a more compact system, and just showing you that pretty much one island at a time would get hurricane force winds, but still a very intense system here with winds close to Category 2 or actually Category 2 intensity, and passing over some of the U.S. British Virgin Islands, St. Martin as well, in about 4 to 5 days. So again, something that we have to consider here, that there is still a non-zero chance that this could strike some of the islands still, even so our GFS is offshore. That's why we have hurricane models for a reasoning, and we will get recon data out in this. In fact, they are on their way out, not into the system, but they're going to be stationing themselves in St. Martin, in the next day or so. So they'll be able to fly out into this, and hopefully that model data or that aircraft data will help to feed new fresh models and help correct the steering pattern and everything else that we need to see for better corrections. All right, but something that has been consistent here on our hurricane models is that a strengthening hurricane seems very much possible, if not likely, given the organization status with 95L as it approaches the Leeward Islands. But again, how close does this get? I do not have a solidity answer on that, okay? I wish I can say it's going to hit the islands. We know for a fact. We don't know yet, all right? So make sure, again, you're staying up to date here on my YouTube channel, because I will be having updates on this every single day as long as this remains a threat. So now that we talked about our intensity forecast here on what I'm thinking is going to happen here, looking at the spaghetti plot track forecast here on all of our hurricane and global models, showing us again a non-zero chance. Again, you can imagine this as a cone of uncertainty still right over on top of these islands, okay, in about 3 to 4 days. You have about 4 days to get ready for this, and I'm assuming that the National Hurricane Center will be issuing PTC advisories on this, which means potential tropical cyclone. So before a tropical storm actually gets designated or a tropical depression, vice versa, they actually go ahead and issue PTC, which means it could become a tropical cyclone at any time. We'll see if they actually do that with this system because, I mean, this is 3 to 4 days away, and I'm hoping we'll be able to get any tropical storm watches or warnings out on this sooner rather than later because of how close this could actually end up going. Again, that is too close for comfort on most of the spaghetti plots, so please keep that in mind. If this deviates a little bit further to the west than what was expected and then it turns this way, then it hits the islands. Okay, but if it moves a little quicker and gains latitude, then it turns out to sea a little sooner. This is an over exaggeration. Okay. So now what about my intensity forecast? This is very, very important. All right. Because again, the intensity is a little bit sketchy right now, exactly how intense this could actually become. But right now, our pair of hurricane models on the 18Z output here as of October 6th, that is just a couple of hours old here. All of our hurricane models pretty much, except for one, have this becoming a category 4, and one's even threatening now a category 5 hurricane, which is an outlier scenario, given the majority of our hurricane models right now and some of our globals indicate this becoming a category 1 or category 2. So just like before, my intensity forecast is pretty much unchanged from the last one, and I am still predicting a 110 mile an hour hurricane in about 3 to 4 days. All right, approaching the Leeward Islands, we're getting very close. Again, I am forecasting a 110 mile per hour category 2 hurricane in about 3 to 4 days, nearing the Leeward Islands or on top of the Leeward Islands during that period, with gradual weakening thereafter, given that the fact is these are an outlier scenario and the majority of the models here show some gradual weakening beyond 5 days. Now I have some other ensemble models that I wanted to show you all too in today's update is from the European ensemble forecast. Again, there's that non-zero risk there for a potential near miss or on top of the islands as a strong tropical storm perhaps, with the majority of the models just offshore, just away from the islands. I mean, this is a close one. It is going to be close. Just how close? We don't know. We're not going to know yet because this has yet to develop a well-defined circulation, and we'll see. The faster it moves, though, it could go a little further to the west, especially if it doesn't gain latitude as fast. Now, that's not the only threat that we are going to be having to contend with here. We have another contender out there on the football field, and that is going to be our area of interest, potentially on some of our ensembles going a little aggressive, especially from the Euro ensemble across the northwestern Caribbean into the southwestern Atlantic, right off the coast of Florida over the Bahamas, something that we might need to watch in weeks to come, especially in the next 1 or 2 weeks. This area could come to life as Cape Verde season settles down for the rest of the season. Looking at the GEFS ensemble, there's also a signal on that model as well, showing some development possibilities, but also something developing off the eastern seaboard eventually down the road in about 7 to 10 days. So we'll see what the NHC does with that eventually. So there's going to be a lot of activity out there in the tropics, but again, will any of this activity affect land areas? And again, I don't have the full-on answer about that. However, though, yeah, 95L is going to be like you almost got to home, you almost made it to the home base, but you got tagged out literally a millisecond before. Like it's a close play. It's like a play review, kind of thing. So that's kind of an analogy that I wanted to bring up in this video, is that this is going to be a close one. It really is. Okay. So now looking at our Google DeepMind AI models, you can still see some members, within 10 to 25 nautical miles off the islands there, okay, of the Leewards. So that's what I'm really watching closely for, okay? And of course, maybe a little bit of a signal here and maybe some signals developing here. These two areas are going to need to be watched closely. But anyways, if you haven't been here before and you do find these tropical weather outlook and discussions very helpful, detailed, informative, and life-saving, especially on Invest 95L, that could become our next tropical depression at any time here from the National Hurricane Center. We're going to see with what they say over the next 24 hours if this is going to become our next PTC. And if this does get named a tropical storm, it is going to be Tropical Storm Jerry on our list of named storms of the 2025 Atlantic hurricane season. So with that, if you have not subscribed yet to the channel, please consider doing so, hitting the bell notification icon to get all notifications for the YouTube channel as I do daily tropical weather updates on 95L. Please hit the like button and please share this video with your family and friends on social media. As always, have a great rest of your Monday on the 6th day of October, 2025. I'll be back with you more tomorrow.